For Mr. Lindsay, yes, sir.
Well, set of records, what time frame are we talking about?
I believe for Mr. Lindsay, I have records that run from, and I could answer that if I can see them here, I believe early February through maybe the 22nd. I may have to pull those up on the computer to actually see.
Okay, so from early February to the 22nd of 2014, is that right?
Let me make sure I can answer that accurately. I believe what was requested was from February 15th of 2014 through February 23rd is what we appear to have records for that phone number associated with Mr. Lindsay.
Okay, so basically what you know about Mr. Kendall Lindsay's use of the phone in communications with the defendant in this case, and or Sam or Frasch or anybody else, was for an 8-day window.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In conjunction with these, the records that you have, did you have a series of records on Mrs. Frasch's phone?
Yes, sir.
And what is the window, excuse me, of those records?
The window that I have for those records is a smaller window from the 21st through the 22nd is what we actually have records for.
Okay. So, for example, there were a number of calls, I think, on the 22nd that went to, I think you've called it voicemail, goes to voicemail. That's a yes?
Yes, sir. And actually, let me back up and correct that. The records that I initially been dealing with for Mrs. Frasch were for the 21st, 22nd. There was a second set of records that actually start on the 20th through the 21st, so I believe for her I do have beginning the 20th.
Okay. And so you don't have any, excuse me, any records earlier in February or January or whatever to indicate how many times calls coming into her phone number would go to voicemail?
That's correct.
So if it was consistent with what you do have, there were half a dozen of them that went to voicemail on the 22nd.
Sounds correct, yes.
Okay. In conjunction with, excuse me, with the activity on her phone, the phone number that you've got records for on Ms. Frasch, is there any way to tell who the actual user was making either calls or sending voicemails or text messages?
We could evaluate that based on content that's in the phone. Again, we look at pictures and other things. By having the forensic exam, we know or can make a better idea of who was usually in possession of the phone. As far as from the cell phone records themselves, just numbers calling numbers, no, we can't.
And I believe that you indicated that there was a track record or a phone tower record showing that Dr. Frasch left the morning of the 22nd around 8 a.m., leaving out of Golden Eagle.
That's correct.
Tracking south, and ultimately ended up in Panama City Beach.
That's correct.
And basically all the calls that you've talked about from his phones or to Lindsay to him and what have you, all were dealing with, at least in the afternoon hours, over in Panama City Beach.
That is correct.
When someone powers down their phone, what does that mean?
Simply means they've turned it off.
I'm sorry?
They've turned it off.
Okay, so basically a phone can either be turned off by whoever's got it, or it can be, the battery can run down.
That's true.
Okay. Is there any way to determine which occurred when a phone is powered down, or?
Sometimes there is a way to determine that. I can't with the information that I have, but when a phone is actually powered down, it usually sends a notification to the network, a power down event. So there is sometimes we're able to tell the difference between whether a phone had the battery removed or whether it was powered down. But I do not have that.
And so you don't know whether or not it was turned off by Mrs. Frasch or somebody else in her home, say at 8:15 or 9 or 9:30 that morning. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. That's all I've got.
Raise your hand. But her lack of activity predates 8 or 8:15 or 9 o'clock that morning.
That's correct. The activity ends the evening of the 21st. The phone call activity that I mentioned earlier, I believe 6:20 p.m. is the end of the actual phone call activity, and there is some internet activity that ends just a few minutes after that.
So to the extent that someone powered down her phone, it's more consistent that they would have done it earlier than 8 a.m. on 4/22/14.
Sure. All I can say from the records are that the events at 11:30 or so that night, we know the last active event was 6:20-ish. We know that there's some incoming calls around 11:30 that are not answered, and those are our first sort of incoming or indications that the phone is powered down, and there's nothing that indicates that changes throughout the rest of the following day.
Thank you. Nothing further.
All right, any juror have a question for this witness? All right, write your question down. You good, sidebar? We will take care of the question, but we'll take care of the question after lunch. We want to set something up to be able to do that. So that's all the questions of this witness. You can step down. The next witness is going to be a little lengthy, and I hate to jump into it here at this point in time before lunch. It's technical evidence, and I want to make sure your attention is at its best. So we're going to break for lunch at this point. Let's be back at 1 o'clock. That gives you a little over an hour and 15 minutes for lunch. Let's be back here so we can get started promptly at 1 o'clock. All right?
Just leave your chat, sir.
Either side have any issues we need to take up?
I do.
All right, we'll stay in session. All right, everybody be seated. You wanted to be,
May I be permitted to have States Exhibit 100 and States Exhibit 104 over the lunch break so I can facilitate the publication of those after lunch?
that's the Super Loop video and the voicemails.
Yes, sir.
You want to figure out a way to play the voicemails where they sound a little better?
That would be preferable.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, we'll let you do that. You have your witness that you can step down. You have the witness that we wanted to proffer available, Mr.
No,
Wilson.
sir. No, sir, I've decided not to pursue that.
Okay, so either one of them.
No, sir.
Okay, so unless something changes with Ms. Brown, you'll be resting.
Right.
I understand. Lawyers always like to maintain their options while they have an hour to think over it, but
Give me time to think, I'll probably come up with something else.
it's, at this point in time, you expect that to be your last witness?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, see y'all at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, guys.
You can charge these.
No.